Good news, the ads have stopped. The election is over and we know the winners. A few blowouts, a few close calls and upsets. And there is a theme in Washington, Springfield, and Jeff City. Chief executives of one party dealing with legislators of the other. In St. Louis County, well, it's its own story altogether. What does it all mean? Stay tuned.
And on Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned.
Okay, our first table of guests will talk about the St. Louis region and in Missouri as a whole. Let me introduce who's at the table with us tonight. From St. Louis Public Radio, Chris McDaniel, and also from St. Louis Public Radio, Joe Mannies, and from the University of Missouri St. Louis, and a veteran pollster, Terry Jones. But before we start this conversation, our Jim Kircher is going to recap this past Tuesday, and he also sat down with the next county executive in St. Louis County.
The ballrooms were set up with food and TV screens to watch the returns. The reporters were there. It looked like your typical election night, but it wasn't. First of all, the St. Louis County Executives race is not usually the main event, but Democrat Steve Stenger and Republican Rick Stream were in a tight race. And while off-year elections are often about who gets their voters to the polls, even that got a bit discombobulated. An example, a Democratic campaign worker outside a Pagedale polling place freely admitted that she didn't vote for one of the candidates on her pamphlet.
Yeah, that's what we're going for. Stream.
You are. All of this, of course, is part of the fallout of the shooting of Mike Brown in Ferguson back in August. A group of black elected officials, the Fannie Lou Hamer Coalition, withdrew their support from Stenger, not because he had anything to do with the handling of the Mike Brown case, but because he's a political ally of the county prosecutor, Bob McCullough. And so the man who was running unopposed for his own re-election became one of the most controversial figures on this year's ballot.
How much do you think Ferguson is hanging over this election day?
It certainly has some impact on the election. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Anybody who would deny that, but how much of an impact, I don't know.
I do have a personal relationship with Bob McCullough, and I was asked to denounce him by multiple groups, one being the Fannie Lou Democrats, and I told them, no, that's just not something I'm going to do. And I'm not someone who throws people under the bus that I've been friends with for political gain. It's just not something I'm going to do.
Some might argue that that decision nearly cost him the election, but maybe this year any Democrat was going to have a tough time winning. And this race wasn't decided until the last ballots were counted. Stenger beat Stream by less than 2,000 votes.
Who have placed their confidence in me to turn our county around.
And even the victory party was crashed by Ferguson protesters.
I thought they would, probably show up. And, when I say it, I mean it honestly. It's not something that bothers me. It's something that it's part of our democracy.
We said we conduct a top-to-bottom audit of county government, and we will.
Before Ferguson, Stenger was talking mostly about better financial and administrative leadership, economic development, job growth, and he still is. But there's just so much attention on the Mike Brown case. And when the grand jury decides, Steve Stenger will not yet be in office. But undoubtedly there will still be plenty to deal with when he is.
There's a great deal of healing that has to go on in the county, and I'm prepared to begin that dialogue that's going to be necessary for that healing, and I'm very much prepared to take actions that I think are going to bring us along toward that healing.
For Stay Tuned, I'm Jim Kircher.
Jim, thanks. Joe, I'll start with you. Did you expect the St. Louis County executive race to be decided by less than 1%?
No. because St. Louis County is such a Democratic county anymore. But that said, there were signs that it was probably going to be closer than some Democrats hoped, partly because of the Ferguson unrest, which we don't know until they finally put out the township by township numbers. That's when we'll finally get a sense of how many North Side votes went to Republican Rick Stream. But there was the split within the Democratic ranks, but also you had a sense that, I mean, as it turned out, there were probably more Republicans than Democrats, potentially, that may have gone to the polls. Even Stenger observed that he thought that the voter interest, which they had assumed would be pretty high, was high, but it was higher among the Republicans. And I'm really eager to look at those township by township numbers because I had been hearing that it turned out, like in West County, in some areas, I was told was close to presidential levels. So I think there was the split in Democratic ranks. There was the energized Republicans, which is part of a national, the national story, and it touched on St. Louis County. But I think the fact that Stenger still won underscores how democratic St. Louis County has become, because it managed to withstand this wave of Republicans that, look at Jefferson County. There's virtually no Democrat left standing in Jefferson County after Tuesday night. But that's not true in St. Louis County.
Well, I do want to talk about Jefferson County, but before we do, why not a recount? Any thoughts on that? Because I believe the law says less than 1% you can recount.
He may, but what Rick Stream indicated was any recount that's been done, they generally have only moved by maybe a few dozen, maybe 100 or 200. The chances of it moving 1,800 is probably slim, and he probably knows. Stream's a smart man. He knows where some of the votes came from.
Indeed, the recounts typically have had fewer than 100 votes net shift one direction or another.
Fannie Lou Democrats that encouraged African American Democrats to cross over and vote for Rick Stream. Do you think they had an impact, or will we not know until the townships are released? And either way, where do they go from here? Is this organization going to continue on?
We won't know whether they had an impact or not until we have the opportunity to look at it, not only individual townships, individual precincts. One of the problems with that movement was that it really did not have an organization underneath it. It had leadership, but not necessarily followership. And its ability to sustain itself, I think, is in doubt. And I think the more likely scenario is that people like Hazel Irby and the new county executive, or about to be new county executive, will find some rapprochement.
And perhaps the most influential African American Democrat was at Steve Stenger's watch party.
Right. Congressman Lacy Clay had decided to go with Stenger a couple weeks ago. And from what I had been told at the time, that while Stenger had indicated he was going to call him, actually Clay contacted him first. So once Clay made a decision to go with Stenger, Clay did robocalls for him. He sent out literature for him. So there are some who think that the effect in North County may be less than what some may have thought, because it became somewhat a power play between different factions, Democratic factions, in North County, as it does everywhere. So we'll be looking at those numbers when they finally come out to get a sense of what really happened.
And I saw you there at the Stenger headquarters. You're sitting right next to some of the folks on his campaign. Were they worried?
You know, Jane Duker, who you will have on later, she at least expressed that she was quite confident, even when they were down by 5,000 votes. I have to say that I was quite skeptical when they were down with 71% of the precincts in, down by 5,000 votes. I was
down 3,000 with 93%.
I know.
But there's a history in St. Louis County that the votes primarily from the farther northern portions of North St. Louis County are the last to come in. They typically come in heavily Democratic, so it's not unusual for a Democrat to be losing 1 or 2 hours into the count.
Let's shift to the city. Can you talk about the Recorder of Deeds office, which I'm not sure, I would like to see a poll on who even knew what that office was or called before this election.
So Sharon Carpenter was running against Jennifer Florida. Sharon Carpenter had to resign in July after violating the state's nepotism law. She hired her great-nephew. She was running as the Democrat. She
resigned and then re-ran.
She ran as a Democrat. She was outspent by like a factor of 20, and then she ended up winning with well over 60% of the vote. I think it was like 67% or something like that. It was not even close.
I mean, Slay's trying to play down, the mayor, Francis Slay, is trying to play down the impact. But the fact is that Sharon Carpenter is a former chair of the City Democratic Party, used to be his babysitter when he was little. Carpenter has a ton of connections. And the fact that she was able to carry this off, aside from the fact that the mayor was siding with Jennifer Florida, showed that A, some of the old guard still has muscle, and B, the recorder of deeds may not have a lot that they do between them and the mayor's office, but I think she may cause them a few little headaches for a while.
Yeah,
because she had the office for over 30 years.
You know, I've been joking about the recorder of deeds and this race, but you know, this week in particular, recorders of deeds have been in the news, especially with
breaking news yesterday. It was.
You know, especially with Sharon Carpenter, she issued 4 same-sex marriage licenses in defiance of the state's constitutional ban against same-sex marriage. That triggered a court case, and then just this week, a judge in St. Louis said that the city could begin issuing same-sex marriage licenses.
And
so it actually had an impact.
Sharon Carpenter also had Democrat after her name, which always helps on any ballot. It's difficult as an independent to get people who are not that familiar with the process. They tend to pick a party label.
Even if the mayor is throwing his support behind
That's
it.
correct.
Yeah, because you got to do a lot. And it was funny, they had this last-minute court fight because Jennifer Florida had put on her material, it said independent Democrat.
Yeah.
So the Carpenter allies went to court and said, no, she couldn't use the phrase Democrat. In the end, the Florida people won, but this went on for a couple days.
Hey, real quick, the recorder of deeds, the marriage licenses are not without politics in and of themselves. Is this going to stand as the judge's ruling that Missouri's gay marriage ban is unconstitutional? Is that the end of it?
It's been appealed to the Missouri Supreme Court. Now the question is the Missouri Supreme Court going to change it? The other question is, are other counties going to follow in the city's footsteps? Already St. Louis County has begun issuing same-sex marriage licenses. I did a story about this today. Other counties have not yet followed suit. But
there's no law that says you have to. There just may be no law that says you can't.
Right. I mean, the wording of the judge's order is it's inconclusive. On one hand, it says that the ban is unconstitutional and that same-sex couples are entitled to a marriage license. But it also does issue the order specifically to the city of St. Louis. Legal experts that I've spoken with say that it applies to everywhere throughout Missouri, though.
Okay, let's talk about the other side of the river. And to get into that conversation, let's go back to Jim Kircher, who did a Google Hangout with one of your colleagues at Illinois Public Radio.
Thanks, Casey. Certainly one of the more interesting and maybe surprising races this year was the race for Illinois Governor. Pat Quinn and Bruce Rauner. When we talk about Illinois stuff, we like to bring in Amanda Vinicky, who's the State House reporter for Illinois Public Radio. You hear her reports on KWMU, St. Louis Public Radio. Amanda, I was a little baffled by this entire race, the campaign as well. We certainly saw lots of ads in the St. Louis area for this. Can you explain how Rauner did what he did to Pat Quinn?
Well, I think a lot of people were surprised, frankly, because none of the polls had this as the outcome. It was supposed to be basically a very, very close race, and instead, Rauner, he didn't run away with it. It wasn't overwhelming, but he got a very clear majority. I think what it really shows is that people were unhappy with not all Democrats in Illinois. We're still very much a blue state, it appears, but they were unhappy with the guy at the top, with Pat Quinn. And they also very much believed Bruce Rauner and his promises of prosperity. So all of those ads, very nasty. I'm not sure how excited anybody was to really vote for either of these guys. I think there was a lot of nose plugging at that, to be perfectly honest. But nonetheless, that they wanted change, hope and change.
There were a lot of things that were being said in the ads, but could we identify a particular issue that this seemed to swing on, or was it really about personalities, and was it really about money and all of that?
You know, I'm not sure if there is one way to gauge. I'm sure everybody has a different reason for voting what they did, and yet I think that the takeaway has to be the economy and in general how state government is going. Pat Quinn tried to vilify Bruce Rauner and say that he was this horrible man who put profits ahead of people, and that was his message. He didn't necessarily have a clear message for what he wanted to do. Talked a lot about raising the minimum wage, and that appeals to some people, but that is not what you have a lot of voters as their primary concern. He tried to say that Illinois was making a comeback, and yes, Illinois had done better when you look at unemployment rates the past few months, but not well enough. I don't think that many Illinoisans had a good feeling about where their state was going, and necessarily that Pat Quinn was the guy to do it. You know, we saw every newspaper virtually in the state, with I think the exception of 2, endorse Bruce Rauner. I think that is telling. It shows how much people really were just looking for something different. And Bruce Rauner, a lot of questions. Some of those negative ads are going to carry over and make it difficult for him, I think, to govern.
And this guy did spend
this big of a bully, you know?
Yeah, he did spend an awful lot of his own money. I mean, that's what really jumps out in this particular race.
More than $27 million. The race overall was $100 million, much of that on the Rauner side, because it wasn't just his big money, it was that of his well-heeled friends. And so a lot of questions, what are they going to be expecting exactly? And will Rauner really look out for the little guy, or is he just going to be concerned with his fellow former and current CEO buds? He has definitely tried to make that a message. However, since even on election night, his victory speech, focusing on compassion and taking care of the most vulnerable. I just came from an announcement of his transition team, where again, he hit that note, continually said competitiveness, which we heard from him throughout the campaign, but also compassion. You're right, though. So much money spent on both sides. I am curious to see if Illinois will take up at this point any revisions to its campaign finance laws. They were supposed to take effect and put caps on the governor's race for this first time. Instead, they were lifted because Rauner early on put enough money in with self-financing that there weren't any sort of contribution caps. Maybe that'll change going forward.
Let me ask you this, because you can, if anyone can understand and explain how things work in the state capitol. But the legislature is still the legislature. Michael Madigan is still the Speaker of the House forever. So what does a Republican governor, what difference can a Republican governor make in a state with such a dominant Democratic majority in the legislature?
First of all, I want to touch on something that I think is really an important takeaway of this election, and that is Speaker Mike Madigan's success. Not only does he hold on to a majority, but a super majority. So both chambers of the General Assembly have that. There wasn't really any chance of the Senate changing, but the House was. House Republicans had hoped to make inroads, and instead they're staying with those 71 members. That will make it more difficult for a Republican governor to get his way. We've seen Rauner talk a lot again since re-election. Throughout the campaign, he said, naughty, 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 these long-term politicians, we need term limits. And now he has said that he is reaching out and that the voters want bipartisan. I think we're also already seeing the difficulty of that. However, kind of this mess and a flub during his victory speech. He said that he had spoken with House Speaker Madigan and President John Cullerton, and then their camps say, no, that never happened. We don't know what you're talking about. We got some clarification. Now, Rauner says he left a message for the Speaker's Chief of Staff and talked to the President's Chief of Staff. That's not those guys. They haven't reached out to him since. I guess a meeting could be set up soon, or at least that's what Mr. Rauner is wanting. But it ain't good.
It starts already, and you've got steady work ahead of you. Always good stories coming out of Springfield. Amanda Vinicky from Illinois Public Radio. Thanks again for joining us on Stay Tuned.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you, Jim. All right, talking Metro East and Illinois, continuing the Illinois conversation. From Southern Illinois University of Edwardsville, he teaches politics. Andy Theising, thanks for coming back to the show. And Patrick Gowan, an editor and an Illinois columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
Let's dive right in with the 12th Congressional District. This is a seat that was previously held by one-term Congressman Bill Ingert, and he was unseated, as you see there. Not really even close, 42 to 53. What's going on there? Is this a historic change? Is that too large of a word? It's been a Democratic seat for a long time.
1942 is the last time a Republican won that seat. Mel Price took it in 44, and it's been in Democrats' hands ever since. So it's a dramatic difference. Now the district boundaries have changed, and it's gone down to encompass a greater piece of rural territory, more Republican territory. It's not the same district it was in 1944, but it's one I don't think we expected to see the Democrats lose control of this quickly.
It has been a slow descent. I mean, in 2006, the Republicans didn't even run a candidate for that seat because Jerry Costello was so solid there, and he was always getting a good 70% of the vote. And then it went 70, 60, and that was when he retired, when he got to 60, and then Bill Enyart gets in with 52, and he's replaced by somebody who gets 52. So the Republicans have had this slow rise in voter turnout, and the Democrats have had this slow decline. And we saw where the lines crossed.
You said it's not the same district it was. Is this an indication that things are changing politically in the Metro East and in that part of Illinois, or is this strictly a redistricting, a result of redistricting?
No, I think it's real change. You saw in Madison County, for example, there was a judgeship. Went to a Republican for, I think, the second time in 100 years the Republicans won a judgeship there. I think St. Clair County had its first Republican judge, second, I guess, maybe in 68 years. Those are lesser indications of the big change. I think things are turning redder in Metro East.
And I think there's a bit of a shift going on. Metro East isn't so much of an urban core population that votes Democratic. It's really becoming more of a suburban conservative population. I think there's a lot of migration, and East St. Louis's population is dwindling, and East St. Louis has always been that powerhouse of Democratic votes. And it's just, the numbers for East St. Louis just keep falling and falling and falling. There just aren't that many voters left. And eventually, I think there could be a very solid Republican county in St. Clair.
And the familiar names are gone. Mel Price was in office 44 years in that district, and Jerry Costello was in office 24 years in that district. People voted, if no other reason, out of habit.
Do we have any less clout now with this change of even just this one seat? I'm thinking a little bit about Scott Air Force Base being in the district, and then going from a former military man to someone who is now a freshman congressman. Is that
or going from having a congressman in the minority to having a congressman in the majority? It works the other way too.
Other complexion changes you're seeing in the Metro East as well. Is this indicative of a larger trend?
Well, yes, I think that Illinois is historically, has always had a strong conservative element. A lot of Republican administrations in Illinois over time. That's not so much of a surprise, but there is clearly a shift going on in Metro East.
Talk a little bit about the ballots that the voters in the Metro East saw this time. You mentioned something, ballot construction. What are you talking about, and what did this do or did not do?
Well, something that Missouri always does is to put a ballot issue on there which will tease out the people who may be sitting on the fence, wondering if they're going to show up and vote. Something that'll really get people out there because they're passionate about an issue. Illinois had contraception on the ballot, and the income tax on the ballot, and minimum wage was on the ballot, and people are passionate about this, and one would think that the turnout would just be tremendous, and by my count, 80,000 Democrats stayed home in the 12th district.
Is this an indictment on the sitting president? Are midterms never that great for the party in power in the White House? Or what do you make of this? Or again, just more of a shift to the red, to the right?
I think it's been shifting steadily and slowly, and I think this may be the strongest indication we've seen yet of that shift. We've been watching it in counties like Madison, St. Clair, that very seldom elected any Republican to countywide office, now have 1, 2, or 3. I mentioned the judge races. It's a strong indication, I think, that things have been slowly shifting, and now it's tipped over.
Amanda and Jim talked about the governor's race a little bit. What do you make of the new governor? What do we know? How is this a departure in any way?
Well, it's not unusual for Illinois to elect a Republican governor. There have been quite a few years of Republican administrations. But Illinois is a state where political parties are very prominent and powerful, and here's a governor who doesn't have a political party. He doesn't come out of the party machine, and I really wonder how well he's going to work with all those powerful party people. I mean, those powerful party people are used to having these politicians do what they say. I think they may be surprised.
He makes money. He knows how to make money. Making money is an art for the impatient people. This is a guy impatient enough that by the time he was 40, he had endowed a professorship at Dartmouth. He'd made that much money already. Politics is a job for patient people. We know he's got the credentials to be impatient. We have no idea whether he has the credentials to be patient, especially dealing with majorities in the House and Senate in Illinois, and Speaker Mike Madigan, who's been there all but 2 years of about the last 30 and is really the top Democrat in Illinois, and we'll want to make sure he establishes himself as that with Rauner as soon as possible.
And they have a veto-proof majority, the Democrats.
The Senate does, and I don't know, Andy, if you've seen lately, the House probably does. There was a county out that might have made a difference, but even if not, it would still be a dramatic majority in favor of the Democrats. Whether veto-proof, it depends on that one vote.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much, Andy Theisen and Patrick Gown. We appreciate your time. Let's hear what you're having to say with the hashtag StayTunedSTL.
All I want for Christmas is the gavel in the U.S. Senate, and I think we're seeing the beginning of that trend here tonight. This is a referendum on the president's policies. This is a referendum, I think, on gridlock. And tonight, the American people get to be heard. And what our plan is, if in fact we are successful as a Republican Party in taking back the United States Senate, our plan is to do something unprecedented, which is to retreat in January as a U.S. Senate and a U.S. House and come up with a 100-day plan to actually show the American people that we can govern, that we are solution-oriented, and we will move this legislation through, and then it'll be up to the president to decide whether he signs it or vetoes it.
And you know, it's not the first time I've been in the minority in Washington. I think we'll persevere and we'll become better for it in 2016.
Let's talk about what might be coming down the road politically here a little bit with our next table. Jane Duker, government and media attorney, coming fresh from the Stenger campaign is where I saw you there. And then from the Stream campaign, Greg Keller, a principal at Atlas Strategy Group. So a couple of thinkers on this very topic. First, before we go forward, let's go back just a little bit. What did you make of the story that was breaking the night of the election when it came to people waiting in line and a lack of paper ballots? It seemed like some issues we had in August we had again in November.
Yeah, it was a lot of the same issues that were in the primary, running out of ballots, except it happened a lot earlier. I heard as early as 9 a.m. there were paper ballots, out at certain precincts.
And is that a big deal? Because what's wrong with using the electronic ballot? Is there a group of people that wants to?
There are a group of people that believe, they want the actual piece of paper with their vote on it, and they believe that that's safer, and we offer it. So if we offer it, you have to make it function properly. And the problem is, and it really showed itself at the end of the evening, when paper ballots had to be printed out at the election board and had to be, card or driven up all the way to North County at 7 o'clock at night. You can't close the polls down because everyone in line gets to vote. And so, we got very, very late returns because of the paper ballot issue. So it did reverberate all the way through. There were reports of people leaving because they said, okay, it'll be 5 hours until you get a paper ballot. Some people weren't happy with that, or they just were sick of waiting in line. And if they're waiting for ballots and the line holds up, and we can do better. We can do better, and we have to do better.
Mm-hmm. This is the rare issue, I think, where you're seeing in politics that Democrats and Republicans can agree on. When the election authorities say that they're going to print enough paper ballots so the people who want to use the paper ballots can do so, we need to make sure that they're delivering on that promise. I think I saw a photo from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch today that showed people who were staying at the polling locations as late as 1 in the morning in order to make sure that they could vote. That's not a good thing.
It's unacceptable. I mean, and we had that problem in 2008, and we need to be doing better, and we can be doing better. So I know that, you know, County Executive-elect Stenger and others have already said, we want to get to the bottom of this. We want an investigation of this. I know the board has expressed interest, the St. Louis County Election Board, and they should, because this shouldn't happen.
Is it too soon to talk 2016 and the governor's race specifically? Or do we already know who might be running?
Oh, I mean, I think, you know, we know some people who are running. I mean, but how this is all going to turn out, I think, is going to be interesting. I mean, I still think we're seeing a primary on the Republican side with former Speaker Catherine Hanaway and Auditor Schweik, and I don't think that's sort of played itself out yet. That may continue, it may not. Right now, really, the only announced candidate is Chris Koster, the Attorney General on the Democratic side. So I think, at least for now, it looks as if the Democratic side's a little more stable, but you never know. I mean, I think there's enough of an unstable environment right now, especially on the Democratic side, given what's happened nationally, in the statewide and even locally, that that sort of thing can destabilize what was otherwise a steady situation. So.
You know, and the Democrat side for governor here in Missouri is actually a lot less certain than you may think on the surface. I mean, Chris Koster's been absolutely rocked in recent weeks. New York Times front page story raising serious questions about, you know, the ethical manner in which he may or may not have been running the Attorney General's office. And there's a lot of buzz out there. You know, I mean, in a lot of Democrat and Republican circles here in Missouri these days, people are asking questions. Boy, where does a front page story like that New York Times hitting Chris Koster come from? A lot of the buzz and a lot of the gossip going on in Missouri political circles these days is that was a story that was planted by Claire McCaskill's people. Claire McCaskill gave over $500,000 to the Missouri Democratic Party over the last couple of years, and there's a lot of buzz that she may be very interested in that gubernatorial mansion herself.
Is that because she doesn't think she can hang on to her Senate seat?
No, I think the question becomes, I think I think actually the buzz is more prevalent on the Republican side, because I think it's hopeful that the Democrats have a primary as well as the Republicans. But I think the issue is, you know, she has 2 years left, and does she want to be in the minority? Is her draw to wanting to be in governor, because she did run for governor once, and, you know, is that draw is that drawing her back to do that? Now, I think with regard to giving money to state candidates, Chris Koster did that. The Democratic Party made a concerted effort to start, you know, really helping with these legislative races. It wasn't that effective. I mean, we lost 7 House seats, so I mean, we've got big demographic problems for Democrats in Missouri, and so I think that destabilizes the environment. But I think we'll have to wait to see whether that reverberates from Washington back down to Jeff City.
Yeah, I think Claire McCaskill is and should be very concerned about her ability to hold on to this U.S. Senate seat here in Missouri. You have a number of Republican members of Congress and other people who are licking their chops at the possibility of running against her for Senate in 2018, and understandably so. She would have lost and lost badly had it been anything other than Todd Akin making some very unfortunate and very silly remarks in the closing days of her campaign, of his campaign against her.
Let's theorize about some other individuals and talk about them while they're not here.
Like we love nothing.
No,
right.
I'm kidding. But some names have come up that a lot of people probably didn't. Well, a couple of people maybe didn't know before this circumstances in Ferguson, and some other folks as well. I want to know. We'll stick with the governor for now. What political future for Jay Nixon after his term is up?
I mean, that's the question of, you know, that question's been asked a lot. He's been very mum about what that's going to be. You know, it's the best kept secret. You know, I mean, it appears from some of the things that he's doing that it would seem that he wants to angle for some sort of political future, but there's been no declaration. He's unequivocally said no to Senate. So that is the question. And I don't know, and he has not said. Yeah. And so he's got 2 years, and you know, I don't know, maybe the Republicans have better speculation than I do.
Yeah, Jay Nixon doesn't have much of a political future. If he ran against Roy Blunt for Senate, he would lose. He's lost every Senate campaign he's gone through here in Missouri, most of them very badly. I was looking, because Tom Schweik won the greatest majority on a percentage basis that we've ever seen in Missouri political history. You know who?
Unopposed.
Yeah. Well,
that helps.
Sure. Well, of course, and there are a lot of reasons he ran
Right.
unopposed.
Well-
And, you know, he's been a heck of.
Sometimes the unopposed do get some write-in candidates to the, to
that
the
we
tune
could-
of 11,000.
That's what we could talk about. Well,
But-
that wasn't write-in, but that was third party. But yeah.
So the point I was going to make was just that when you look at the best performing statewide candidates in the history of Missouri, coming in either third or actually fourth is Jack Danforth in the first 1988 U.S. Senate campaign against Jay Nixon. So I say Jay Nixon doesn't have much of a political future because he can't beat Roy Blunt. His own party doesn't like him. They don't like the way that he's run the governor's mansion. He's done very little to help Democrats up and down the ticket. And because of his horrible fumbling, which has made national news of the Ferguson situation, he stands no chance of getting any sort of appointment in the Obama administration.
Someone who we saw on national news a lot because of the Ferguson situation, the alderman of the 21st Ward in St. Louis, Antonio French. Any indication that he's eyeing a higher office? Is it too soon to talk about?
No, I mean, I think there's, I don't know what office. I mean, clearly he wants to keep a profile, has gained a profile, and wants to keep that profile. Now, how he's going to use that, I mean, there's a number of different ways to sort of be successful in the game without necessarily running for office. And so, he is clearly trying to, and has established a name and a profile over the Ferguson and Mike Brown situation. And so the key will be, will that translate into something that actually, makes change politically, moves the needle? I think that story is still yet to be written, but he's clearly, making a name for himself.
Maria Chappelle-Nadal. I'm curious if there's any gossip about her maybe seeking a higher office than state senator.
Well, yeah, no, I think we've seen a couple proxy wars between Senator Chappelle-Nadal and Lacey Clay, and so I think we saw that first proxy, in the Josh Peters state rep race, where it was basically, the Maria faction versus the Lacey Clay, and Lacey Clay prevailed. We saw it again in the county executive race with Senator Chappelle-Nadal going with Rick Stream and Lacey Clay going with Steve Stenger. So we're seeing that proxy war happen, and it seems that there's been a lot of talk about her taking Lacey on at some point, either this time or next.
These are both very young, very aggressive, very smart, very media savvy Democrats in the county and city area. One thing that's interesting about Antonio French is he's up around 20,000 Twitter followers or something like that.
120,000.
So it's absolutely just ridiculous growth that he's seen in his social networking following as a result of this. It's not even in his district. He doesn't even come from that part of the city, Right. I mean, so these are two young, smart candidates, smart politicians who have made the most of an unfortunate opportunity to really, really amplify their own political statements.
But you bring up something interesting about that, because will that be converted? Will you be part of what happened, or will you be part of the future and part of the solution? And that is where, will they take this, and is it based enough locally that they can turn that into something that locally will actually, turn into something? And so I'm very curious to see how that pans out.
Last name I have on my list, Rick Stream. What's his political future?
I think he still really has a political future. First of all, I mean, just such a decent, hardworking, well-meaning guy. Ran a fantastic campaign, came a lot closer to winning a very difficult seat than most other people. I think probably the Stenger campaign included thought that he could possibly come in. Eric Schmidt is the senator from Rick Stream's district in which he lives, which includes much of Kirkwood. He's going to be running for state treasurer and is going to be out in 2 years. I think a lot of people are thinking that if Rick Stream decides he wants to run for that state Senate seat, it will probably be his for the taking, and by virtue of all the time that he's spent in Missouri government in the House, he'd probably be a great fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think prior to the Ferguson situation, I think that the whole reason he was running was to sort of establish a name so that he could keep his name up while he waits for the 2 years for Senator Schmidt's seat to
Even
come
he
up.
didn't think he could win. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I think, I think realistically when it started, I think that was probably right. I do think that he ran a good campaign. I think circumstances made it easier for him, and so this was a good opportunity for him, and he did run a good race. I mean, I congratulate him on that, and he's a good public servant, and so I would doubt that he would be done.
All right, we'll leave it there and see what you're saying with the hashtag StayTunedSTL. Thank you both. Okay, let's talk to a couple of folks who won on Tuesday night. Jill Shoup, the Democrat from the 24th District, state senator. That includes Creve Coeur, Town and Country, Chesterfield, Maryland Heights, St. Anne,
Olivet,
all the
Overland.
way, all the way up to 70, you said.
That's right. That's
and Shamet Dogan, a Republican, state rep, 98th District, Baldwin, Fenton, Ellisville, Wildwood, that part of our community. Okay. Now, this is going to sound like a softball, so give me a good one here. But what do you truly, sincerely want to tackle when you first get to Jefferson City? You've been there before, so I'll ask you, as a senator, what do you expect? What is your priority?
Well,
in the minority, I should say, as a
in
Democrat.
the minority, but I think I'll be a strong voice for the policies I put forward in my campaign, including ethics reform, expansion of Medicaid, which is not only a moral imperative, but absolutely fiscally smart for the state of Missouri. And education is a huge priority for me, from preschool to K-12 to higher ed.
Representative-elect Dogan, your first priority as a Republican. You'll have the luxury of being in the majority.
That's right, a supermajority. And I think what I campaigned on, some of the issues are some of the same ones that Republicans nationwide campaigned and won on, which are making government smaller, getting government out of our lives. I think we all share the philosophy that government is too big and too intrusive and butts into too many aspects of our lives. So we'd like to do that. And a result of that is I think that Republicans believe philosophically that the more government, or the less government you have, the more jobs will be created, the better business climate we can have here in Missouri, the better we will be positioned to attract businesses from other states rather than losing them to other states.
I want to ask you about Ferguson. The mayor of Ferguson said at the city council not too long ago that there are things they would like to see done that cities just don't have the power to do. They need state legislators. They need the state legislature to take on some challenges. Is there a role that Jeff City plays in Ferguson?
I think there may be a role, but I think that it's almost larger than some specific legislative kinds of policies. This involves a huge discussion about race relations. What happened in Ferguson was not the beginning of the problem, it was just what brought it to light. So I think that starting this commission and bringing people together to talk about race relations in Missouri and to see how we can go forward and how then certain legislative policies do play into that. I mean, I think it starts with things like education. And when we are underfunding education based on our own foundation formula, and we're not providing what is needed, particularly in districts that have high percentages of poverty rates, we are fueling those same fires of keeping people in lower income brackets together with a sense of hopelessness that they're not going to see a bright future because their education isn't there. The strong education that we feel we need for all students in the state isn't there. That's a basic starting point. So I think we're going to have very different opinions about how we go forward and how we move to overcome the division between the races that we see in as an outgrowth of Ferguson.
Mr. Shamet, I know this is something that's been on your mind because you sit on the Baldwin City Council, and you brought up the issue of body cameras, and you wanted body cameras on your officers. Specifically, should they be deployed to other parts of the county to deal with anything that may arise in the future. Your thoughts on the role Jefferson City might play, and when I say Ferguson, we've, I think, all come to understand that means a lot more than the city limits of that municipality.
That's right. And the Michael Brown incident, I think, brings to light the fact that body cameras are something that are much needed for police officers. If the officer had a body camera, then all these questions about what really happened, I think, would be resolved. We could just say, go to the tape, instead of having different witness perspectives, and Mike Brown, of course, who cannot provide a perspective. So I think body cameras are going to be something that is talked about at the legislative level. Another thing that I'd like to discuss is something that Wisconsin did, which is introducing the idea of independent investigations whenever there are police-involved deaths, whether it's a shooting, whether it's a death in police custody that happens some other means. Wisconsin passed the first legislation in the country on that issue requiring an independent commission. And I'd like for us to at least explore that avenue because I think there's a lot of distrust out there of police's ability to investigate themselves in situations like this. So I'd like to restore some of that trust.
You mentioned Medicaid expansion. Any chance of that actually happening? You rolled your eyes, so I'll have you go first. What comes to mind when I even uttered that phrase?
It's an issue that I think is part and parcel with Obamacare, which Missouri voters decisively rejected. which Republicans, a lot of us campaigned against very specifically. And I think if you look at the outlook for expanding government in general, but with this program in particular, I think most Republicans would rather reform Medicaid the way it exists rather than expand it.
Okay, any chance of reforming Medicaid?
I think that's definitely something that will be looked at, most likely. I have my own ideas about that, which are still being fleshed out a little bit. I'm a freshman legislator, so I'm only going to have a limited impact on any of these issues, but that's something that I'd like to see happen.
We'll leave it there. Thank you both. We appreciate your time. Let's go back to social media to see what you're saying. So we've just done 46 minutes of politics, and no one has mentioned the Tea Party. Is that still a factor? Professor, we'll start with you.
Much less of one, and moderate Republicans around the country are very careful not to have too many Tea Party candidates in the competitive U.S. Senate races. I think it's a big reason why the Republicans did so well earlier this week.
Agreed?
Yeah, I don't think it's as prevalent as it once was. I think one of the things that the Republican Party is doing better is they're recruiting a little bit better candidates. You look at someone like Tom Cotton in Arkansas. This is someone who can really, not just get the Tea Party folks fired up, but is also someone who the Republican kind of establishment community in Washington, D.C. can look at and say, this is a guy who, by virtue of what he's done in his life, is someone who we believe can actually get things done.
Go ahead, Joe.
I think the Tea Party is a factor. Especially some of the beliefs. Some of the beliefs actually may have become more mainstream within the Republican Party because the Tea Party, many Tea Party people believe there's too much. They're kind of aligned with the Democrats in the sense that they think they're kind of wary of corporate welfare. At the same time, they're wary of any sort of big government. They want taxes low. So you saw in Jefferson County, for example, where a lot of Republicans won. Many of those, I would arguably say, would technically be considered Tea Party. It's just they don't use the name, but the beliefs are still there.
In Illinois, with Rauner, not only not Tea Party, he's not anything. The man took no stands on social issues, ran entirely on finance, hasn't really revealed himself. He's been a big contributor to the ACLU. If the Tea Party had any hold in this election, it doesn't show, not with Rauner.
You mentioned Jefferson County. What can we learn from there? Mr. Roarda was defeated in Jefferson County. Is that part of the region changing?
Yes, I think it is. I think we've seen a shift in population that is going south and going west, and so I think you're seeing the more conservative areas on the outside. When you talk about the suburban rings, that's where it goes, and the population has been shifting. You could see through the redistricting and the new census that the population has moved west, and so St. Louis County is getting more blue, but you go out to St. Charles, you go down to Jeffco, you go to those outer rings, and they are traditionally more conservative. So.
It was the last bastion of the conservative Democrat in Missouri. This is now a complete correlation, perfect correlation almost, between ideology being conservative and being a Republican. No more conservative Democrats.
Just the name Ike Skelton comes to mind a little bit there. A Democrat that maybe got a lot of folks who would now vote for Republican.
And his seat is now occupied by a conservative Republican.
Exactly. And also the idea, back to Mr. Roarda, Jeff Roarda, this is the man who was running, and you saw the ads on TV linking him to President Obama, if I'm not mistaken. But then also he was connected in the Michael Brown story to Officer Darren Wilson in that he works for the St. Louis Police Officers Union. Those things kind of go in different directions. How did that all play out?
Well, I think Roarda was pretty confident that his chances of winning, in part because of being tied as a former police officer and as the business manager for the St. Louis Police Officer Association, that would actually help him. And it may have, but it didn't help him enough. But though his voting record, though, is very close to many Republicans in the legislature. So it's kind of like what Professor Jones said. His voting record with Paul Wieland, the Republican who won, on many issues wasn't that different. And Wieland, unlike some Republicans, Wieland made a point of emphasizing that he's not for right to work, he's not for some of the anti-labor issues that some Republicans are espousing. So you had a blend of actually two candidates, very similar voting records. So then it became a contest that were dealing with fringe issues, where Rorta was trying to paint Wieland as maybe not being supportive of police, law enforcement, and then you had Wieland's ads saying, well, he's with President Obama. So I think it was...
It may have just come down to DER. I mean, because I think they were so similar on a lot of issues that, I mean, he could have maybe said just about anything and there was going to be a certain amount of margin. It was just that there was a D or an R by his name. That's my opinion.
Do you agree that St. Louis County is bluer, turning bluer?
I don't know about that. I think there's a very interesting opportunity for a coalition to develop with this Fannie Lou Hamer coalition of Democrats supporting Rick Stream the way they did. I think Republicans have a great opportunity to take advantage of that enthusiasm.
Are Democrats concerned about that?
I don't think so. I think this was a unique situation based upon what happened in Ferguson, and I don't think that you're going to see that. I think that the values of those people still support the Democrats and the policies that the Democrats put forward.
Can we talk about the national politics? Who's going to run for? Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I think one thing I do want to point out is that I think if you look at the Democrats nationally and more significantly, who were running away from the president, right or wrong, they lost. It was kind of like the Republicans 6 years ago. Any of those who ran away from George Bush, most of those lost. And from a local level, in some ways, Stenger actually might have been helped because he refused to run away from McCullough. So because the people who didn't like him because of McCullough weren't going to vote for him anyway, but he did then have this manner of, hey, I'm not going to throw Bob McCullough under the bus, and it may have helped him with some.
Who's extremely popular. Talk about bipartisan. He's extremely popular among
Bob McCullough.
Both.
Yeah,
yes.
He didn't have a Republican opponent.
And really does. And I think, at least from all the polling I saw, the one steady thing was that, believe it or not, his polling numbers, he may have become more polarized, but his numbers did not go down. There were people whose support got stronger for and people whose support got stronger against, but his numbers never changed, which I thought was very fascinating. So St. Louis County is very capable of being sort of nonpartisan in a lot of ways. But I think the demographics are moving blue. That doesn't mean that Republicans don't have opportunities and they should try to seize them. But it's a blue county. And I think, with everything, going through a primary usually prevents you from winning a general. So not only did you have that, but then you had the extraordinary circumstances of Ferguson. I mean, the idea that, that Stenger got through all of that, a lot of the tough circumstances he had nothing to do with him being a D or not being an R. So I still think it's very blue. And so
you're on the end of the island down there.
And I want to go back to what you said about the Tea Party and take us to national politics. I think that the Republicans could be a victim of their own success because when a party is going to dominate institutions like the entire Congress in significant numbers, we're going to start seeing fissures. And the Republicans have done a very good job in the minority and holding themselves together and keeping the line. But this happened to the Democrats under Clinton, and I would say, especially if we have a Republican president in 2016, all of a sudden the Republicans are going to start seeing these fissures, and that Tea Party element may come back with a vengeance, trying to exert its power, saying, hey, we finally made it. Now we're going to exert our power. So it's something that's happened to Democrats, and I think it could happen to Republicans.
Do you think that it's going to happen in the state legislature, where they now have 118 seats in the House? Do you see them becoming a victim of their own success?
I see it could. I think it could because, all politics are local, and I think it starts out, I think it would start out in the state, if not at the local level, but in the state, and then in Congress as well.
Any indication? Okay, so some popular shows. You got the John Olivers and the Jon Stewarts talking about how important state races are. That's what really has an impact on our lives. That what you folks do is what we're really going to feel. Is the general population, that the general kind of casually voting population, they're engaged. but maybe not enough to know that you're your representative or you're their state senator. Is that changing at all, that attitude?
I don't think so, because the St. Louis County Election Board was predicting the turnout was going to be close to 50%, about 46%. It wasn't. It wasn't. Didn't even hit 40.
What do we know exactly what it was?
It was. In the
St. Louis
mid.
County was
Yeah.
about 44.
44 and 55.8 in 2010, but we had a United States Senate on the ballot, so turnout was bigger. But the night of, you would have thought that it was great turnout because of all the lines, and we've now come to determine that it was paper ballots and sort of incompetence that made it look like it was bigger turnout than it was. So no, I agree with you. I'm not sure that has changed, and while we did see a big sweep Republican, I'm not sure that, I know you may disagree, but I don't know that that's necessarily rah, rah, rah pro-Republican. They're frustrated with what's going on. So that too can be cyclical. So now they're going to own it. I mean, the Republicans are going to own the state, and we're going to see what they're going to do completely unchecked. And I think that will start to cause some issues. It's cyclical.
I think it was pretty clear that what you saw on Tuesday night, was a referendum on Barack Obama. He's right now one of the least popular presidents that America has ever seen. Everyone in America seems to realize that it was a referendum on Barack Obama, except Barack Obama. I mean, that press conference that he had the day after Election Day was just pretty extraordinary. So I think it's pretty hard to put lipstick on this pig if you're a Democrat. You talk about the swings, the pendulum swings that you see.
We're going to keep talking. Don't lose that train of thought, but we are out of airtime, but we'll keep this conversation online. Find us there. Staytuned.9net.org. Go ahead.
You see these pendulum swings, and I remember I've worked on the Bush Cheney campaign.
The arts enrich lives and build.
And you saw the exact same things being said, except it was being said about Democrats. And I think your point is well taken, is the fact that in politics, nothing lasts forever. As soon as you're on top, you're just that much closer to being on bottom.
That's a nice way to put it.
Write that down. Jump in, I'm sorry, free for all.
Because I think, this is one of the things that, just looking at it tactically, and it just amazes me that when you've got, like I said, like the Democrats nationally, we're getting hammered over this thing, saying, oh, you're too close to the president. Well, what they should have done from a tactical standpoint, Republicans tend to do a better job of this. They don't let you see, they don't want you to see them sweat. So they would at least say, well, look, I disagree with the president, but I agree with him on minimum wage. I agree, whatever. And I think that it turned out to, I think that's one of the reasons the Democrats lost so badly, because you can't run away from the guy at the top.
Discipline.
So you've got to. And I think in 2006, the Republicans ran into this, but on a lesser scale, because the Republicans, in general, tend to have more discipline.
Yeah, I ran Jim Talent's U.S. Senate campaign in 2006, and it was the exact reverse situation where you had George W. Bush being incredibly unpopular, and we made a decision that as a campaign, all throughout the entire campaign, that, listen, all the bad stuff about George W. Bush and the way people feel about him, you're going to get glommed on. That's going to be glommed onto you, whether you like it or not. Now, if you want to lose some additional votes, go ahead and seem like you're a disloyal person.
Right.
Then you're going to lose. You've already lost all the independents. You're not going to get any of the Democrats. You want to lose some Republicans? Make someone feel like you're stabbing their guy in the back.
Well, I think that's why
Welcome to my world.
just narrowly lost. He narrowly lost in 2006 when there was a bloodbath for many Republicans in other states, and I think that was why, because Talent shrewdly did not run away from Bush, because he saw that. It just amazes me that people didn't get that. You're going to get tagged with the president anyway, and so you're a candidate in Kentucky, and you won't admit whether or not you voted for him.
Yeah, that did not go well. That did not go well. And the message discipline. I mean, the values aren't any different. We see this with a second-term president. If you're going into the midterms, it's ugly. And I name one that hasn't been there. Right. And so it's not like we haven't seen this before. So it does amaze me that the lessons don't get learned, because Republican or Democrat, it's always that second term, midterm, where things are going to go badly, and you're going to be faced with this. And I would think that the rule book would have been written by now. But
here's Charlie. I know Charlie, and I think people at the table don't. Is it Hinderleiter?
Yeah.
That's, okay.
Yeah.
So he is a smart guy. He's tweeting.
Scientist.
Yeah, he's tweeting at us. Should St. Louis County elected offices be nonpartisan if most of what they do is nonpartisan work?
Actually, he has a point. I mean, one could be a point could be made that maybe that should be done like it is in many municipalities. But frankly, the county was very Republican, and they crafted the charter and all the stuff that would craft these elections, and the Republicans decided that it would be partisan. So it's rather funny when it's a Republican saying, well, should it be? Well, you guys did that 50 years ago.
Right.
I didn't give you enough time to talk with the two of you at the table. So what's on your mind as you sit and listen to other people talk about what you guys do?
Well, so I think that the messaging discipline hasn't been there for the Democrats. And I think that what we saw in this election cycle, I'm hopeful that it will change in 2016, but we have to pull ourselves together and we have to talk about the successes we've had. Even with Barack Obama, in my view, has been a great president. Some wonderful things have happened on his watch, and we need to start talking about those. The few Democrats who I saw that won seats, like my seat, Deb Lavender's seat, Tracy McCreary took my seat, we talked about issues. We told people what we stood for. Our opponents didn't necessarily do that. And I really think that it resonated with the people in my district. And I was willing to say, if these aren't the things that you believe too, then you'll vote for my opponent. But I've got to tell you who I am. I think that Democrats need to be less fearful about doing that. And I think as we go forward and we start to talk about who we are and what we believe and what our vision is for the future of those districts, that state, the nation, then we start to bring people back and they can see with us where we need to head.
Well, I just want to go back to a point that was talked about earlier about Republican possible overreach, having a huge supermajority in both the House and the Senate. I'm not personally worried about that. I know we have very smart leadership in the House, very good leadership in the Senate. They're all really good politicians, and I think policy-wise, they are in tune with what the voters of Missouri want. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these huge majorities. So I'm very confident that we're going to move forward on a pro-freedom, pro-economic growth and economic liberty agenda.
I think we're all pro-freedom, I just have to say.
Right.
I feel like I have to step in and say that.
Well,
Chris,
Jill, I'm not so
is
sure about.
Chris, you've been quiet. I know this. Your mind has got to be turning. So, what have I missed? And we can go one more round the table here.
It all comes back to the Recorder of Deeds race, really.
Doesn't it always?
No. You know,
Will same-sex marriage? Are we now a state that allows same-sex marriage? What do you guys?
So any county that begins issuing same-sex marriage licenses, the Attorney General can't stop them, but they aren't forced to.
And the Attorney General, although he is working on behalf of the state and its constitution, he personally does not have a problem with this.
Right.
So he's going to go ahead and appeal, get this to the state Supreme Court.
Yep.
Why? Why not just leave it where it is? But no stay right now.
Because he says that his job as Attorney General is to defend the state laws. Now, he denied that maybe part of this is because he got hammered a few weeks ago when he decided not to challenge the judge's ruling. It was a different same-sex marriage issue, but it was whether or not Missouri has to recognize same-sex marriages formed in other states. Right. But he was telling me today that, well, the issues are different. But the bottom line is, he said that he feels it's his job to appeal this and let the court decide. But he made very clear that A, he opposes the same-sex marriage ban, and B, he thinks it hurts the state to on an economic as well as moral level. He gave a very lengthy speech today at the Missouri Chamber, and that was part of his address.
I thought it was interesting that the Republican response was, you need to appeal, but nobody is going crazy saying, you know, the world's going to end because we're issuing these licenses. I mean, I was in the governor's office when the 2004 ban went in, and I mean, it was, the world's going to end if we don't stop this. Marriage and life as we know it is going to end, and so what we haven't seen is no opposition, basically.
No organized.
None. And so I think that shows sort of where we've come on issues. And so we've got candidates that are, you know, when you look at each issue, I think we appear more red than we are. At the same time, you've got supermajorities in the legislature, Republican, gay marriage is happening in Missouri. I mean, that's a dichotomy that eventually is going to have to sort of resolve itself. And so that's the swing I think you talk about.
I think there's also a recognition that even if they were uniformed in outrage against this, there's not anything that they can do. I mean, you know, they could come back and go for another constitutional amendment. It's not going to change anything if the courts say it's unconstitutional.
We'll leave it there. Thanks for your time, everyone. I appreciate it, your insights, and good luck in Jefferson City to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Casey.
Thanks.